Buddhism is 2,500 years old. It was developed by people who understood that the untrained human mind wanders, grasps, resists, and generates suffering almost automatically. The Buddha was not teaching enlightenment to people who already had still peaceful minds. He was teaching it to people whose minds worked a lot like yours. Mindfulness has been flattened in modern culture into sitting still and being calm. But that is not what the original teaching describes. Buddhist mindfulness, sati in Pali, means awareness, clear non-reactive noticing of what is actually happening right now. That can happen in stillness. It can also happen in movement, in conversation, in the middle of a busy mind. Today, I want to show you 3 specific Buddhist practices that work for hyperactive, ADHD-style brains. Not because they've been dumbed down, but because they honor how the mind actually moves. In traditional Vipassana Buddhism, there is a technique called noting, where instead of fighting mental wandering, you name it. Thought arises, thinking. Emotion arises, feeling. Sound distracts, hearing. You don't analyze the content, you just label the category and return. What this does is profound. It inserts a moment of awareness between stimulus and reaction. The ADHD brain, which often feels swept away by thoughts and impulses, begins to develop what's called the witness, the part of consciousness that can observe experience without being consumed by it. Try this. Sit for 5 minutes. When a thought appears, silently note thinking. When your body wants to move, note restless. When you feel frustration, note frustration. Don't try to stop any of it. Just name it. What you'll notice after a few sessions is that the naming creates just enough space that you stop being inside the experience and start being able to observe it. That gap, tiny as it is the beginning of freedom. Noting doesn't require you to be still. It doesn't require you to suppress thoughts. It only requires you to notice what's happening. And for an ADHD brain, noticing is actually a native skill. You notice everything. You're just not trained to use that noticing intentionally. One of Buddhism's 3 marks of existence is Anicca, impermanence. Everything changes. Every thought, every feeling, every state, including the painful ones, arises and passes. This isn't a philosophical abstraction. It's a practice. When a difficult mental state arises, instead of believing it is permanent, you observe it as a wave. You watch it peak, and you wait for it to pass. For ADHD, brains that experience emotional intensity as total and endless in the moment, this teaching is genuinely freeing. The ADHD emotional experience is often described as feeling everything at 100%. Rejection, frustration, shame, excitement, grief. They arrive at full intensity, and in the moment they feel permanent. But they are not. Every state you have ever experienced has passed. Every single one. The practice of impermanence is simply the practice of remembering that, especially when you're inside a difficult moment and your nervous system is telling you it will never change. When you can hold even a small amount of space around an intense feeling, not to dismiss it, but to observe it, you stop making life decisions from inside the peak of the wave. That pause is where wisdom lives. The Buddha described a teaching called the second arrow. The first arrow is the painful experience itself. The mistake you made, the relationship hurt, the task you couldn't complete. The second arrow is what you do to yourself about it. The self-criticism, the shame spiral, the story about what it means about who you are. The first arrow may be unavoidable. The second arrow is almost always optional, and it's where most of the suffering actually lives. An ADHD adult forgets an important appointment. That's the first arrow, uncomfortable, with real consequences. But what follows? The hours of shame, the "I'm such a disaster," the replay of every other time this happened, the conclusion that you're fundamentally broken. That's the second arrow. And it does far more damage than the missed appointment. Buddhist practice doesn't eliminate the first arrow. It teaches you to recognize the second one before you fire it. Self-compassion is not weakness. It is a survival skill. For ADHD, brains that are structurally more prone to making the kinds of mistakes our culture judges harshly, things falling through, things forgotten, impulsive words. Learning to stop the second arrow is one of the most practical forms of healing available. Buddhism was built by people who understood the untrained mind deeply. The practices it developed are not for people who are already calm. They are technologies for people whose minds are active, intense, and searching. Which is exactly what yours is. This week, try 3 minutes of noting practice. Just 3. Notice what arises, name it without judgment, return. That's it. See what you observe. Next video, Stoic philosophy and ADHD. Specifically Marcus Aurelius on the one thing that ADHD adults struggle with most, and why the ancient Stoics had already worked out the answer. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Comment below. Which of these 3 Buddhist ideas landed most for you? The noting, the impermanence, or the second arrow? Tell me.